Colonel Mark Tillman had trained for almost every emergency that could happen, but not for this.
It was obvious to those of us watching the TV upstairs that it wasn't a light aircraft. You know, the imprint in the tower was way too large for a light aircraft, too much damage for a small plane.
On that day, September the 11th, 2001, he had one of the most important jobs in America.
Relocate the President of the United States. Highly classified plan, never been done before.
While almost every other aircraft in the US was grounded,
Air Force One cleared for takeoff.
Colonel Mark Tillman accelerated Air Force One at full speed down the runway, trying to get US President George W. Bush to safety.
I know there were a lot of people that said, hey, you know, a hijacked airliner could have hunted us down and crashed into us. It's a big sky.
And in this exclusive one-on-one interview, Colonel Tillman gives his account of that horrific day. When did you first hear that something tragic and terrible had happened in the United States?
By the time the second plane hit the tower, we knew the country was under attack at that point.
He remembers the sheer confusion and conflicting reports coming into the cockpit, even a threat that an aircraft was targeting them.
And you're hearing the, reports of, we've lost so many first responders. Everything was just constant.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're looking at live pictures of the Pentagon
and how they all felt when they thought that their own Air Force had shot down the fourth airplane.
He's down?
Yes.
Why didn't he land?
He did not land.
I still remember the words, as the president said, if they don't follow the directions of the fighters, they're authorized to shoot them down. That is one of the sickest feelings I've ever had in my life.
Oh, he's down?
Yeah, somewhere up north.
I made a quick prayer to God. We were down, but there was no way they're going to keep us down.
This is the Colm Flynn podcast, brought to you by thelastlines.net. And this is an interview with Air Force One pilot Colonel Mark Tillman. Colonel Mark Tillman, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview.
Oh, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Mark, before we talk about your incredible story and your role on that very dark day for the United States and dark day for the entire world, September the 11th, let's go back a bit. And I'm fascinated to know, how does one become a pilot on Air Force One? How do you apply for that job? How do you get it?
Air Force One is at the 89th Airlift Wing at Andrews Air Force Base. And all of us started out applying to the 89th Airlift Wing, flying senators, congressmen, vice president, first lady. And then at Air Force One, we pick from the best of the best. So that's how you do it. And, if you're lucky enough, Air Force One will ask you to come over and fly with them, kind of yank the gear for one of their superstars. And that's what I did. I was lucky enough to be asked to come over and fly a Gulfstream 3 for President H.W. Bush. And from that point forward, they eventually hired me and worked my way up to, stay within the Air Force One unit to become the president's pilot, assigned to a president, or what we call the numbered pilots. I was presidential pilot number 12. You interview with the White House. The Air Force provides names to the White House when a new administration comes in, and the White House picks from that group of people. So
that's incredible that you were the 12th Air Force One captain pilot in history. So they don't obviously change them that often. They stick with the people they have. And I'm sure you had to go through, Mark, extensive background checks and...
Definitely. The clearances for Air Force One are specific for being around the president. So all of us had to have those clearances, as well as top secret clearances to be introduced into a lot of programs for protection, as well as just day-to-day operation.
And when you were growing up, Mark, where did you grow up in the United States? And did you always want to fly?
No, I grew up in South Florida, Hollywood, Florida. My father was a construction worker, built roads. I'd say we were lower income folks, but no, flying wasn't an option. It was far too expensive. I would ride my bike to the airports and watch the planes come in and out, and but never thought much of it. It wasn't until I needed to have my education paid for. So I joined the United States Air Force, and I was a chemical engineer going through school or going through university, and realized that chemical engineering was a lot of fun, but flying looked pretty neat as well. So I went ahead and did 2 years as a chemical engineer, and then went to pilot training and became a pilot. It never looked back. I doubt I've used my engineering experience a whole lot. So, but it's a tremendous amount of fun.
So the moral of the story, kids, is drop out of college if it's not your passion and follow your dream.
No, I graduated. I have a degree in a master's as well, but so I didn't drop out. But I went ahead and graduated, and then went on to what the Air Force wanted me to do as a chemical engineer, and then went to pilot training from active duty. So.
And Mark, when you became a pilot in the Air Force, did you think that you would stay within the Air Force and fly different fighter jets or bombers or supporting planes? Or did you want to go out and fly commercial for one of the big American airlines? What was your long-term goal?
No, flying for the airlines was never a goal of mine. I wanted to see the world. It was in college. I was in the junior year abroad program, and I spent 18 months in the United Kingdom, going to doing chemical engineering at the University of Sheffield, and just going to Europe, traveling around Europe. I thought it was amazing.
And again, Mark, I presume that being the pilot for the President of the United States is probably one of the most, if not the most prized position to have in the Air Force. Is it a case that you put yourself forward and ask to be considered for the position? Or is it that someone notices what you're doing and how you do it, and they tap you on the shoulder and say, we want to have a word with you about something?
There's two kinds of people. There's one, like you mentioned, everybody trying to be out front and get noticed. I've never been like that. I went ahead and I was a professional aviator. I flew fairly well, and it was noticed. So, and then did everything to support. Big team player is my concept. So that I was noticed, supported, it did well. And from that point forward, they moved me up, and I worked and played well with others and took care of people. And, so that's been my forte all through my career. I was more interested in staying in the United States Air Force than I was becoming an airline pilot, flying from point A to point B. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but I enjoy the challenge of waking up every morning and having a different mission, a different job to do. That's kind of what keeps me going. But now that I'm retired, waking up and not having a whole lot to do has been a real challenge.
You want to get back into the air on Air Force One?
Absolutely.
What was it like, do you remember, when you first walked onto that incredible aircraft and you sat in the cockpit?
It was amazing. I mean, it is, from the moment you walk into this enormous complex, you're working with the best of the best. And there are, some places you go, you have rules and they bend them for you. At Air Force One, you have rules and everybody follows them, which is really neat. And, hello, sir. How you doing, sir? Welcome to Air Force One. They give you an Air Force One uniform that's unique. You get into the cockpit, and everybody expects excellence out of you. And when you look to the guy to your right and left, or the lady to the right and left, you expect the same out of them. So it was an incredible assignment, working with folks that were highly dedicated and always there to support the president and the first family.
And how would you describe it? Because, of course, it's not just an aircraft when the president is on board. It is the flying Oval Office. It is the command center. How would you describe what Air Force One is?
It's actually just the White House in the air. I mean, it is. It's the mission is to provide safe transportation to the president of the United States, and that's a given. You will always provide exceptional transportation. But the biggest challenge is, as we saw on September 11th, was you've got to have everything else perfect. Communications. He's got to be able to. He or she has to be able to talk to national leaders at a second's notice while you're doing 650 miles an hour. So it's a challenge to keep everything going, but it is a group of people dedicated to make sure everything is looked at and taken care of before we move forward.
And we take it for granted today because just a few days ago I flew back from El Salvador, and all the way across the Atlantic you have full Wi-Fi on the plane coming from satellite. When you go over ground, it even comes up on the screen in front of you. This is ground-based Wi-Fi now coming from cellular towers. In a few days I'm going to Singapore and I'll have the same on my Emirates flight. But back in 2001 it was a different story, even though it wasn't too long ago in history, but the communication wasn't as it is today, which we'll get into in a moment, and how that was a hindrance to you when you were flying on 9/11. But you started, you said, as a co-pilot on Air Force One. Who were you flying with then?
So the primary of the president was President H.W. Bush Sr. Colonel Danny Barr was presidential pilot number 10. He hired me, and I was sitting in his right seat telling him what an amazing job he was doing constantly. Besides yanking the gear and keeping things safe, you got to poke the boss and let him know that he's an incredible pilot, and he is. He's still to this day is an amazing flyer. So, but that's where I started on the 747, the Gulfstream 3 and 4.
And then after that, you served under Bill Clinton.
I did. I was the deputy for presidential pilot number 11, Mark Donnelly, another amazing pilot, and I got to fly quite a few missions in command with President Clinton, and then shortly after that, I was selected to be President George W. Bush's pilot for Air Force One.
Flying under different presidents, does it change anything in Air Force One, the dynamic or the atmosphere or the way, the rhythm, the way you do things?
No, there's really no changes. The president and their staff they're basically the same. The challenge is what's going on at the country during the period of time that they are the president. So the staff have different priorities. So the staff of the president, they always start out young. They don't really know what Air Force One can do for them. But then they slowly learn that there's just, you ask for anything and we're going to supply it. We're going to provide it. And they eventually know that to make their life easier. They need to understand exactly what we bring to the table. And usually it only takes 2 or 3 trips. And then they know exactly what they can do to support the president.
And Mark, this is a repurposed or specially designed Boeing 747. Am I correct in saying that? And in the cockpit, you have yourself, you have your co-pilot. Would you have engineers as well, flight engineers behind you?
Yes, it'd be a flight engineer and then a navigator. I mean, you got to realize this was a mid-1980s aircraft delivered in 1990. So it's a round dial gauges, no digitizing, no digital capability, analog gauges, etc. I mean, it's an older plane that's extremely well maintained. Modifications come every few years to it, but for the most part, it's still a 747-200 with a lot of modifications.
When you mentioned operating at that level of excellency, all day, every day, was that difficult to keep that up every day you turn up to work? I mean, we all have bad days, but you really couldn't be in that position where you turn up and you're having a bad day. You had to be at a level that most people just can't even comprehend. You had to be at that level every day going to work.
Definitely. I talk about zero failure. That was our life. Weather's going to be bad. You're still going. Threats against the president, you're going to minimize the threats, but we're still going. That United States of America is going to show up in your soil because we represent the United States of America. That is a challenge, and it's a challenge for a lot of people to be constantly reminded that they can't fail. And it's when there is failure, you just cringe, and everybody knows they've let down the first family, the president, et cetera. So if the failure, as I would tell every brand new person, if the failure is a mistake that you've made that's serious enough that you could have done better, and you weren't trained right, you didn't stay with the training, et cetera, there's an excellent chance that a one mistake is gonna move you out of the unit. You lost all credibility with everybody around you.
Let's go and talk about September the 11th. It's been 23 years now. It's hard to believe. I remember coming back from school that day in Ennis, County Clare, and like people all over the world, being told this incredible thing is happening in the United States, and turning on my television and the pictures being relayed on Irish TV, the one tower ablaze, then seeing the live shot of the second plane going in. You were in Florida with Air Force One and with George W. Bush, the president. Remind us why you were there in Florida.
You know, the president had an education campaign, No Child Left Behind. So we went to Florida, Jacksonville, then over to Sarasota, and he was meeting with school teachers. And then on the September 10th, we landed in Sarasota. September 11th, that morning, he was going into an elementary school to read to the students. And it's exactly what he did. I mean, he went there, he's reading to the students in the elementary school as everything was starting to occur. So it was, it was challenging for him where he was at getting information, but it was challenging for all of us. I mean, the information we were getting, kind of the fog of war was in play, and it was a challenge to find out exactly what was occurring around the country.
Yeah, that was one of the points of contention. People were wondering, why did he sit there for so long in the elementary school after receiving the news? But as you say, in the fog of war, you don't know what exactly is happening. You just don't know what's going on.
Yeah, the President Bush took a lot of hits for that. But what people don't understand is that every person that he would have needed in the White House were right there in that school with him. I mean, Ari Fleischer, the press secretary, was across the room from him, motioning to him to stay in position. In the room behind him, the schoolroom, he had all the communications, land-based communications. Karl Rove was there, Dan Bartlett, communications director. Everybody was in that room going through the paces of what was going to happen. And prior to him moving, the country was under attack. So there's an element within the military and within the White House where our job is to ensure the continuity of government. And everybody that's part of that was being moved into a position. The president was our job, and we took the information and we started working on where we're going to move the president. So while he was talking with the elementary school students and making sure that they weren't, concerned, think about it. If all of a sudden, the chief of staff, Andy Card, had walked up to the president and said, "Oh my God, the country's under attack," and the two of them jumped up and ran out of the room. You got 25 elementary school students and teachers and the press and everybody. That just doesn't make any sense to scare the life out of these kids. So he did it, as a true president. He went ahead and took care of business, and everything was going on behind him. Then he walked out, was briefed. Then they set up what he needed to do and move on to the next phase to let the American people know what's going on. And from that point forward, we started taking care of the president and the continuity of government.
And Mark, I know that you were back on or around Air Force One at the airport, and I presume you just thought everything was going to schedule and that the president would come to the plane later after his appointment at the school and his other meetings. When did you first hear that something tragic and terrible had happened in the United States?
I arrived at the plane 2 hours prior to takeoff, so around 8:30. So after talking with security out front, talking with the crew chiefs, I walked up the stairs, went into the nose of the aircraft, and the first attack was at 8:46. So at 8:46, all of a sudden, I'm in the president's quarters, just looking around, talking with the flight attendant. That was Tina Turner was Tina Stein married Scott Turner, Tina Turner. She was our flight attendant. So she was working in the forward area. She's the president's flight attendant, talking with her. And then over the PA system, the radio operators let me know that, hey, pick up a white phone. And I pick it up. And once I started talking with them, they let me know, you need to come upstairs and see what's happening. And that's when I went upstairs and saw, at this point, the Today Show and all the morning shows were showing the first tower had been hit by, as they call it, a light aircraft. It was obvious to those of us watching the TV upstairs that it wasn't a light aircraft. The imprint in the tower was way too large for a light aircraft, too much damage for a small plane.
And in your mind, Mark, with your Air Force background and training, what was going through your head? Because when people realized then that it might have been a full-bodied aircraft, they thought, well, maybe it was a navigation error or an air traffic control error. But what was your first initial instinctual reaction?
The first idea was pilot error or an air traffic control issue. It was not terrorist related. I would have assumed I would have gotten more information, more heads up of a terrorist related attack. But there was nothing at the time. So we assumed it was basically pilot error or something like that. Because at this point, they hadn't basically brought together all the agencies in the government at this point. The FAA knew what was going on. The FAA had multiple aircraft that they had basically tagged as potentially hijacked. They had no idea because planes were not following their directions. But we were not aware of that at the time. So initially it looked like just that. It looked like an aircraft accident.
Like a tragic accident. And what we alluded to at the start of the interview, when we compare communication technology today to what it was like even just 23 years ago, I believe that upstairs in Air Force One, you didn't have streaming footage from the television networks or from back at the Pentagon or the White House. You had just kind of a regular rabbit ears television set where you were watching this grainy footage.
Yeah, the television was based on tuners, so it was kind of like your old rabbit ears. So antennas on the top and bottom of the aircraft. So we were tuned into Sarasota news stations. So here in the States, breaking news on a local news station, there wasn't national news, but there was the Today Show, Good Morning America, those kind of things that were on. And we would always, one radio operator would always watch those because that's where you would get your most important information, just due to the fact media has the ability worldwide. They have reporters all over the world, as you're familiar with, that get information immediately, and then they try to confirm it with the government. So we go ahead and assume whatever we hear on the media is accurate, and then we try to confirm it. So that's what we saw at that point. But we had no satellite television, no direct TV access or anything like that. We had satellite access for voice communication and for data, fax machines, et cetera. But it isn't like today with internet capability, et cetera, streaming video and all of that. That just wasn't available on the plane, or it wasn't available in the commercial industry on planes.
When you saw the second plane go in, what did you think?
When the radio operators called me upstairs, by the time the second plane had gone in, everything had come together at that point. The FAA had given information. They talked about all the different planes that were being hijacked, and all this information was flowing into us. So by the time the second plane hit the tower, we knew the country was under attack at that point. And at that point, the decision was made to do like we always do for the continuity of government: relocate people, relocate the President of the United States. Highly classified plan, never been done before, but it was time to go ahead and execute it. And that's where we were moving to at that point. It's just knowing where we would take the president to have him hunker down and provide tremendous communications so he could talk all over the world.
And Mark, how would you describe the atmosphere on board Air Force One at that time? Was it shock? Was it panic?
No, it wasn't. For the crew of Air Force One, we were trained for it. So all I had to do is let everybody know this is what we're doing, and everybody had trained for it, and we moved forward. Cell phones were not, very few people had cell phones back then. Blackberries were available. Everybody put their communication devices away on the crew. Radio operators were told that the crew could make no calls, could pass any information. Families were not to be told where we are, what we're doing, what's happening. We're calm now from this period forward. Local police, et cetera, were moving forward, asking us what we needed. we set up a guy named Will Chandler, my top cop, tremendous man. He went ahead and established the perimeter. And these are the things that we started working with the Secret Service. So everything was ready to receive the president, move him to another location. But the attitude on the plane, the staff really wasn't there yet. They were in the elementary school with the president. So we were ready to receive the staff. Our challenge was sometimes there's issues with the manifest. A name may not be on our manifest that shows up at the back stairs. I just made the decision with Will Chandler, hey, if the person shows up and they're not on the manifest, there's no discussion. Move them away immediately. And that's what we did. You know, if you weren't on the manifest, you're not coming with us that day.
For you yourself, Mark, what was going through your head up in the cockpit? Because I presume you know the president is going to be arriving back to the aircraft at any moment. You will have to go as soon as possible. It's a scenario, as you said, that has never been done before. Are you thinking, do we have enough fuel on board? Because we didn't know this was going to happen right now. Do I have the coordinates? Do we have a safe flight path? You were getting reports of other aircraft being hijacked, possibly even in the same area.
You know, fuel and those kind of things, I've always got enough fuel to emergency divert anywhere in the United States on any trip I go on. So I could have taken them anywhere in the United States. The plane's air refuelable as well. I could have had a tanker come meet us, but that kind of stuff wasn't, it was in my mind, but it wasn't going to happen. My big concern was looking at it from the moment he arrives, the moment we get airborne, where we're going to take him, that we've got the right firepower from the moment he arrives to when we're airborne. We have fighter escort. Do we know that the path's going to be cleared to Washington, D.C.? Is Washington, D.C. going to be cleared? Do I take him to Andrews Air Force Base? Do I take him to another location? All of us were highly trained, and one of the biggest challenges for us was always, do you do everything as you normally do? Because you're going to be a sit duck. They're going to be waiting for you. Is Andrews Air Force Base safe? As extra security brought in? Maybe we should take them to another base first, kind of unannounced, to see what's going to happen, and let everybody know. Have a decoy, have our backup aircraft. These are all things that I put in motion. Maybe the backup aircraft goes back to Washington, D.C. first, and we call it Air Force One to see what's actually going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. But these are just challenges that you're thinking about. But the other side of it is you don't want to confuse and add more fog to the war by having a separate Air Force One show up and they think the president's coming in and whatever. So you've got to figure out what the threat scenarios are. And these are the kind of things that we're thinking about.
And as you say, you don't want to be a sitting duck. So I'm sure one part of you was, let's just get the president on board and get the plane in the air as quick as possible, and then we'll figure it out in the air.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a big sky. I know there were a lot of people that said, hey, a hijacked airliner could have hunted us down and crashed into us. They could have, but they couldn't. There's just not the technology at the time for them to track me and do whatever. Could a fighter do it? Sure. Could, somebody waiting at a close airport do it? But it became very obvious that the threat wasn't to us. The threat was to do what, the terrorists have always done. They attacked the Twin Towers. They weren't successful, so they came back to finish the business.
You must have been thinking that too, that this can't be happening when you saw, first of all, the Twin Towers, after you said the previous failed attempts on the towers years earlier with those bombs in the underground car park. But then you saw the Pentagon get hit, and you think, surely, how did they get to the Pentagon? And then you have the reports of the other plane that's heading to Washington, D.C., presumably to the White House. You must have been thinking, what is happening to our country at the moment?
Yeah, just kept trying to figure out exactly what am I missing. The FAA at one point said 9 aircraft had been hijacked, and it was as simple as transponders that failed and they weren't talking to the controllers. And and the airline pilots, if you think there's confusion, you're planning to fly to Miami and the controller tells you you're landing in Tampa and there's a national emergency and you're not getting information. They're not telling you that the Twin Towers have been attacked, whatever. They're just being told to do it and do it now. And so now they're talking to their home companies, and their companies are telling them, lock the cockpits. Planes are being hijacked. You may have somebody. So I mean, these are with all the amount of airliners, it wasn't easy for them either. And that was a challenge that everybody, professional wise, everybody did an amazing job, from the FAA controllers putting planes on the ground, making things happen, to the pilots, airline pilots, corporate pilots. Everybody did what they were told to do and executed perfectly. I mean, you could have had numerous crashes, et cetera, but you didn't, because everybody followed the procedures.
How fast did you get off the ground, Mark, once President George W. Bush was running up those stairs into Air Force One? Was it just shoot up the engines, those 4 engines straight away?
Yeah, the engines on the right side were running when the president came to the aircraft. The moment he hit the bottom stair of the staircase, I started the left engine. So by the time he got to the top of the stairs, back door had been closed. As the stair truck was moving away, the engines on the left side had spooled up. So we were ready to move at that point and started heading out to the runway. At this point, the president, not happy about communications capability. It was trying to get hold of SecDef. We had serious challenges. All of us did. The White House, as well of us, getting hold of SecDef. Sec State was coming back, I think, from Peru, from South America. Couldn't get a hold of Sec State, Colm Powell. I mean, it was just it was a tremendous communications failure all over. And this had nothing to do with the terrorists. They didn't destroy our communications. It's just what our communications were at the time.
It was the saturation, wasn't it? They were just overwhelmed.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, if you try to get hold of somebody in Washington, D.C., and they're on a BlackBerry or whatever, there was no cell service for them, just because the service, everything was saturated. Commercial satellite capability saturated. Airlines were using it. For us, all our commercial satellite capability was taken away from us just because the airlines were using it. We thought we had priority. We ended up using a lot of military satellites, and we resolved the conflict with us getting communications rather quickly. But there was a period of time where we went from 40-some phone lines down to 2.
And did you have any interaction with the president once he got on board? Did he come up to the cockpit at any point to check on you guys, or was it just you barreled down the runway up into the air and then tried to figure out what to do next?
No, my point of contact was Andy Card. Andy Card came up to the cockpit, sat down with us, discussed what was going on. The president was on a constant phone link with the vice president. So everything was on speaker, so we could hear the radio operators. We could hear all conversations between the president and anyone talking to the president. I wanted to know exactly what he was knowing. And that way I could be one step ahead of him to provide support, get him to the right places, bring in the right aircraft to support him. And the radio operators that we had were incredible. I mean, we were getting information they were picking up information from everywhere and funneling it to the president as well as the vice president in the White House.
And I believe, Mark, in the fog of war, as we speak about, that even when you were taking off, you had a report that someone was at the end of the runway with a weapon pointing towards the plane.
Yeah, that's correct. Taxiing out, the Secret Service let us know there was a man with a long gun at the end of the runway. It was a simple procedure. Instead of taxiing by him, I just turned around the taxiway and took off over the top of them. I still had to get moving. The guy at the end of the runway was the guy that was filming us at the end, is what we found out. But I mean, everybody was at high stress levels. You see a guy pull up at the last second, starts pulling something out of the back of his vehicle. The right decisions were made by the United States Secret Service. Their job's to protect, and they did an amazing job that entire day.
And what you mentioned a moment ago about the confusion in the air and the FAA assuming that if planes didn't respond or talk to air traffic control, or their responders were not working, that they just had to presumptively assume that they were hijacked, and that even there was a plane coming towards you where you were in Florida, and because the pilots were talking back to their airline, who were telling them to lock their doors, they weren't talking to air traffic control. And then it was reported to you that this plane was coming in, not responding, coming towards where you were, and you had to divert course to see if it would follow you.
The FAA let us know that the plane transponder was off, was not talking to the controllers, was descending into us. And at that point, it was, once again, big sky theory. All I wanted to do was I had fighter support, but there's no reason in the world to have fighters go ahead and move in on that airliner. So all I wanted to do was continue on, have the controllers tell us exactly where the aircraft is. And then shortly after we learned where the aircraft was high and to the right, all I did was ask to turn back out towards the Gulf of Mexico, which I needed to do anyways, just because the president was wanting to get back to Washington, D.C., but the rest of the White House, the vice president, Dr. Rice, et cetera, were wanting him to delay. So I turned away just to see what the story was with the airliner. The airliner didn't follow us. And roughly at the same point, the airliner came on frequency, started talking with Jacksonville Center and let them know, hey, we've swapped transponders now after Jacksonville talked to them. And it was a simple mistake, or not even a mistake on their part. They were busy solving issues for them.
Yeah, and I suppose the right call when you saw what was happening to other planes in the air and this aircraft being so close to Air Force One and to the president, they had to just assume it was a threat. That was probably the best thing to assume.
No, definitely. You always err to the safe side, and that's exactly what we did at that point.
Was it a difficult position for you, Mark, to be in as the main pilot, the captain, and you have this almost fight on board? As you say, the White House wants the president, the commander-in-chief, to go to one location. The president himself wants to head back to DC. I'm sure there are lots of other voices in the mix suggesting Air Force bases to go to and secure locations. So are you just kind of picking points in the air to fly to burn time, to wait for a decision to be made, or are you heading in a general direction?
The war plan, the relocation of the president, the design is to move him to a secure location. So originally that was our focus. Though when the president was told that, he countermanded the orders and said, no, we're going back to Washington, D.C. That's all it took from me. The commander-in-chief, as a military man, I've got the beauty of I've got the commander-in-chief with me. So I hear it first right from the man's mouth. And that's exactly what he said. He passed it through Andy Card. Andy Card told us that's what he's doing. We heard from the phone conversations that, he was being asked not to head back to Washington, D.C. But my direction was to head to Washington, D.C. at the speed of heat. And we were going fast, heading back to Washington, bringing in all the firepower we needed to come with us, fighters, as well as finding out exactly what was in Andrews Air Force Base. And then events started to catch up, more information, and the president made a great decision to go ahead and turn away from Washington, D.C. and let's start working on making things safe, so that when he arrives, everything we've taken into account everything that's occurring at this point.
I heard as well you say once that when you were en route to Washington, or when you were in the air, 2 unidentified aircraft were coming at you at high speed. And then what was it? What did you see out your window?
Once the president made the decision that he needed to talk with the American people, we didn't have that ability on the plane, except he could talk on a phone, they could hear him, but they couldn't see him. I mean, there was no streaming video. So the president wanted to get on the ground, and we were trying to find the right place. No sooner did we start talking with the vice president and Dr. Rice, as the plane started, as they told me he wasn't going to Washington, D.C., we were going to go ahead and loiter over the Gulf of Mexico, the panhandle of Florida. We got information from the vice president that this is what's going on. The last aircraft, fighters were moving into position. They asked the president for shoot down authority of the aircraft. He passed that to him. I still remember the words, as the president said, if they don't follow the directions of the fighters, they're authorized to shoot them down. That is one of the sickest feelings I've ever had in my life, where I know, the United States military is going to shoot down an airliner to save lives in Washington, D.C. Right thing to do, of course it is, but it's, we're killing our own. So thinking about that, and then the vice president said, hey, we just got word that Angel is the next target. Angel was the classified call sign of Air Force One. And as we were in the Gulf of Mexico, all of a sudden Houston Center advises Air Force One, you have fast movers at your 7 o'clock. Okay. The controllers were not supposed to talk to us unless something significant was about to happen. That was significant. So the controllers let us know Hey, we have fast movers, fighters coming up on us. How fast are they? They're supersonic. They're coming up on you now. Where are they out of? We don't know. They've come out over the Gulf of Mexico. They're coming up on you now. And then we get the radio call. It lets us know who they are, what they are, and that they're there to support Air Force One. Their commander was a group in Texas. Their job is to protect the Gulf of Mexico from anything coming in the Gulf. They would rally against it and protect the United States. But these two fighters joined up with us, heavily armed. They joined up on the wing. The beauty of it was they came out of President Bush's guard unit. So they were basically supporting the boss. And it was, it's just a great feeling when you find out, hey, somebody in the United States Air Force was told, you really shouldn't support him. You need to do this and that. And a colonel makes a decision. It makes more sense for these fighters to be on the wing of Air Force One protecting the boss. And that's what lets you know that the right people are making the right decisions on that day, which was incredible. And the fighters joined up on us. We let President Bush know they're from his old guard unit and they're taking care of business. And that was a big morale boost for all of us.
That's awesome. Protecting one of their own in the sky. And I've heard you be asked many different questions about it, but never about if you were frightened. Were you scared at any point?
No, I wasn't scared at all. I continually went through things in my head of, have I done everything I can possibly do to protect the president as well as do the right things? Make sure he's got everything he needs. But there were so many things going wrong. It was just getting more information, then you'd counter that information, working with the United States Air Force, the United States military, hearing the responses of, the first responders in New York. That was saddening. That was, you're hearing Mayor Giuliani talk with the president. You're hearing the fire chiefs, the captains talking about things. And then all of a sudden the tower came down and you're hearing the, reports of, we've lost so many first responders. Everything was just constant. So, there wasn't any time to be worried about anything or be frightened, whatever. Everybody on the crew did amazing. That's how you survived. And that's what was going on the plane. Navigators, the pilots, the radio operators, all of them were coming up with stuff. A young radio operator, when we lost all the communication, said, "Hey, sir, from my old job, I still remember the codes for all the satellites for that job and whatever. Do you want me to pull those satellites in? We might get in trouble for it." "We'll never get in trouble, son. Go for it and make it happen." He gave us 5 satellites immediately. So, these are the kind of people that are driven to make things happen, do the right things to protect the United States of America.
Yeah, and they're the kind of people that you want there at that very time, at that very moment. It must have been difficult when you heard that the 4th plane had crashed in that field. Was it in Pennsylvania? And I know that at the time there was confusion after that order was given that the fighter jets could shoot down commercial aircraft if they weren't responding or following the directions that were being given to them. And I believe that the initial thoughts were that it had been shot down by the US Air Force.
Yeah, that's correct. We got information the plane was no longer on radar as it crashed. The president asked and the vice president asked whether the military had shot it down. We were standing by trying to get that information. All I was thinking in my head was, I'm a good Christian, and that's all. I made a quick prayer to God. Hey, let us get this information quick and let us rally and let us figure out exactly what has occurred. And shortly after that, we got the word from the fighters saying no. They hadn't even come into position yet. They saw the airliner descending. And at that point, the president was asking if it looked like there were any, signs of life or whatever. And eventually we got the word, no, it's there. We can't even see a sign of an aircraft. It's just a large hole in the ground.
Wow.
So everything changed at that point. Everything now it's not literally a cleanup operation, but it's a point now where we're trying to make sure we've figured out everything that's going to occur. And now it's time to get the president on the ground so we can talk with the American people so they know that he's actually still the president of the United States and that everything's being accomplished. And then it's time to get him home, make everything happen to get him home. get them home safely and make sure that we know that the threat scenario is no longer active. I mean, a lot of threats were still coming in on the way home. Each one of them would be countered. So the worst part of the whole thing was seeing all the damage in, ground zero, and the amount of firefighters, police, civilians that were killed as a result of those towers.
Before I ask you about that, Mark, flying over Manhattan and seeing for the first time the huge hole and the debris and rubble where the Twin Towers once proudly stood, before you got the president back to Washington, D.C., where did you end up landing eventually, and how long did you stay there?
The first stop was Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. President got out. He talked with the American people. They set up a media conference. He jumped back on. Then we had to delay we were kind of doing leapfrogging around until Washington was considered safe. So we took him to Offutt Air Force Base, put him deep underground. It's a command center, for the world. So the United States military has tremendous communications from that location. So the thought was, let's put him there. Let's get him back up to speed. Let's let the world know what's going on. And the cool part of, flying the president is all the other nations around the world coming alive, talking to the president, letting him know that, hey, we're right here for you. We understand what has occurred, and all the different nations coming alive, and countries around the world providing him, basically letting the president know that he's, we're supporting it.
Could you hear those phone calls? Remember you said that you could hear the president. You could hear the other heads of state calling in?
It was being passed to him. The heads of state weren't able to talk with him, but people, the vice president, Dr. Rice, were letting him know what was occurring around the world. I mean, simple things. All our bases around the world were brought up to a high threat level.
What was it like when you brought, just a few days after 9/11, you brought President George W. Bush down to New York and you circled the plane around Manhattan?
It was the same kind of day as September 11th. It was beautiful skies, clearing a million. You could see everything. I went ahead and went over ground zero, banked it up on the side of the plane where the president's quarters were so he could see it, roughly 1,000 feet in the air. And you could see everything. You could see the towers were down. That image is still in my mind. You could see the towers. You could see it still smoldering. You could see people on the ground, the firefighters and trucks coming in and out. Then we turned and came back and brought the president to McGuire Air Force Base, just because it was a more secure location than JFK. And literally the president then helicoptered in. Helicopters landed at the Wall Street landing zone. They gave him even a lower view of Manhattan. But, my memory of Manhattan was, devastated. But we went there on multiple occasions after that. And, I got to go to to different fire departments on behalf of the president and the White House. And we got to see, work with the NYPD, the Port Authority, and everybody, all the police, and literally gave them tours, and then they gave us tours, and we went to ground zero, and you could just see everybody coming alive. It was just, we were down, but there was no way they're going to keep us down. And then when the president on that day made his speech on ground zero, this is going to sound crazy, but I talk with that speech a lot of times because it's so inspirational. Here's a guy they gave a megaphone to, the president of the United States, and he came up with this incredible, simple speech where the firefighters are yelling, "We can't hear you." And he comes back, "Well, I hear you. The people that knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon." And the crowd goes crazy. That brings tears to my eyes. If I'm feeling down, I'll pull that one out and just listen to it and see what America was like back in those days, how we all came together. And that's what I try to do in the speech, is let them know, hey, when someone's chanting USA, USA on ground zero after they've killed all their friends and the buildings have come down, these are true Americans, and they're moving towards making America way it was before.
Isn't it incredible, Mark, that the awful tragedy that it was and the horrendous loss of life, over 2,000, but in the very darkest and worst of times, the brightest and the best can come out in people. And you got to witness that firsthand.
I did. I mean, I got to see it all over the United States. I got to see it when we went to Europe, when we went to Asia. Of course, there were threats against us that we countered, but, there were events, we went to Ireland, we went to Scotland, we went to all of these in the United Kingdom, we went to Germany. There's the usual people that don't want you there, but the majority of folks were right there supporting the United States of America. And, we came to their aid throughout many wars. America was aided by people all over the world. And it was an incredible view, 30 feet up, looking out the left window, seeing presidents and coming to the side of the cockpit, seeing the Pope come to the side, seeing, people related to the Pope, all of his people that would come, and then the president would go meet with the Pope and everyone. I mean, it was just stuff you couldn't imagine.
I have to ask you very quickly, because I know you've been so generous with your time, but since I'm here based at the Vatican in Rome covering Pope Francis, he doesn't have an Air Pope 1 or anything like that. But I know that you were telling me before we started recording that once when you flew into Rome, I think you had the Swiss Guard. You were able to show them Air Force One.
Yeah, it was a surprise to us. All the staff is left. A guy named Joe Hagan was the deputy chief of staff, and before he left, he goes, "Hey, we got a surprise for you. Some of the folks from the Swiss Guard are out here, and we'd like to let them have a tour." And we worked it to make it happen. And then at the end, they said, we'd like to reciprocate. We'd like you to come back, and we want to give you a tour of
see the Pope mobile.
Yeah. So what was the most impressive, as I was telling you earlier, we got a tour of the catacombs, and then the Swiss Guard then brought us into the area where they were at, and there where they would live and their families in a kind of an alleyway. And as we're walking along, the one gentleman stopped us and he said, "We've got to wait here just momentarily." And it made it sound like the Pope was above us in one of the quarters because they were right next to it. I don't know if it was or not, but we waited. And then he said, "Okay, now you can come through." And we went to their area where they lived. And, a little guy was on his bike and he was riding as fast as he could, probably like, a 5-6-year-old. And his chain came off his bike, and he stops and he looks at his bike, "Hey, I'm a father of 3 and I'm roughly the same age at that time." So I turned his bike over, put his chain back on, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, you're the Air Force One guy. What are you doing?" I was like, "Hey, this is what it's about."
That's a beautiful story for that little boy who can tell people for years to come that the captain, the main pilot of Air Force One, fixed the chain on his bike once upon a time.
On his bike.
That is so cool. And I have to ask you as well, because I know you have 3 children, as you mentioned, if I remember correctly, Erin, Riley, and Patrick.
Yes.
Very good. You've picked them straight out of Tralee, County Cork, County Donegal. There's those beautiful Irish names.
Yeah, we're Irish English. My grandmother was Maloney, and all her family came from Ireland. So we learned. I was a pretty good drinker as a young man, and we always, that's what the Maloneys did every holiday. I'm not saying the Irish are drinkers, but we always had.
You wouldn't be the first.
We always were treated very well, and we went to Ireland quite a bit, and it was an incredible time with the Maloneys, and so all of my children, absolutely, one of their names is definitely of Irish origin.
I remember once when I was 15 or 16 working in a hotel in Ennis, the West County Hotel. And there was great excitement when all of the American media and presidential support were staying in the hotel because George W. Bush was landing in Shannon Airport. And I forget why he was there, but he was spending a few days in Ireland. So that must have been you, Mark, that was flying him in.
Definitely. Early on in my career, flying senators, congressmen, et cetera, we always used Shannon as a refueling stop. So we're very familiar with the folks there, the fuelers. And then with the president, anytime we'd go to Ireland, Shannon was an easy stop for us because everything came together there. For us, the hotel across the street from the airport was where the crew stayed, and then the rest of the staff stayed at other hotels, kind of in a secure zone with the president. But the people took care of us. The Irish coffees at the airport bar there. Every night, probably 15 of us would go there, and they'd set us up with an Irish coffee. That was just amazing.
Oh, Mark, remember your excellence. You need the excellence. A few Irish coffees. And of course, we had President Joe Biden. He went back to his ancestral home in Ballina, County Mayo, recently. We had as well Barack Obama going to Moneygall and holding up the pint of Guinness. That shot went all over the world. We Bill Clinton golfing down in Ballybunion. So we've had a long line, going all the way back to John F. Kennedy coming to Ireland. So it's really special that you were able to come with them on many of those trips. Mark,
it was us.
When you look back on your incredible career, what do you think? What stands out in your mind? What's the highlight of what you got to do?
The challenges of September 11th, sneaking the president into Baghdad. For me, what a lot of people don't understand is I've met people all over the world, Middle Easterners, et cetera, people everywhere. There are bad people in the world, of course. There's bad people in the United States, but there's amazing people all over the world. And for us to think that people aren't going to help people, that's wrong. I've seen it in every country we've gone to. Everybody wants to help each other, and they want to, so there's no reason for hatred in the United States or hatred around the world. We've definitely got to get away from that, like it was back after September 11th when we all came together. And it's slowly evolved that we kind of got away from that. So for me, I've seen the best of the world. I've seen people helping people after a tremendous, calamity that occurred. But I've seen people helping people, and that's what I'll always remember. My son's a Navy pilot, a fighter pilot, and those are the things that I'm seeing in him now. There's so many things going on in the world, and all I tell him is, look, when the time comes, you're going to do the right thing. You've been trained for it, and everyone's going to come together, and we're going to do the right thing for not only the United States of America, but for the world. We're going to support the right people. So have no fears. We're there to make things right. And
does your son Patrick, my brother's name as well, Patrick, does he want to become a pilot on Air Force One someday?
He's a fast mover, so he enjoys firing rockets, shooting guns, and bombing things. So he enjoys going the speed of Mach 2 and 3, and he's into that. Where Daddy really enjoyed having a steak and a cup of coffee while he's doing the flying places. So completely different, but God love him. He's the best of the best in my world.
And then Erin and Riley, are they in the Air Force as well, or are they in the U.S. government, or what are they doing?
No, Riley's in Arizona working with a mortgage company. My daughter Erin is a guidance counselor in a high school in Florida, giving back to the kids. And every one of them has a mission in their life, and it sounds military-like, but for me it is. They have a mission, they're executing it perfectly, and Daddy's always there for them. All they have to do is text or call, and I'll give them what I think should be done, but I know they'll do the right thing.
Mark, you're definitely a military dad, that's for sure. You're executing your mission in life. Listen.
Yeah, that's what I'm about.
Mark, it has been an absolute privilege to talk to you and to hear your incredible story of the pivotal role that you played on a historic day. Even though a very dark day, you were able to do such good and to help protect the United States president on that day. So I appreciate you taking time to share the story with me.
No, glad to do it. I was truly honored to talk with you, so thank you.
I owe you a Jameson when you come to Ireland or to the Vatican, an Aperol Spritz.
No, absolutely. And you need to come to this. Let me know when you come to the States. I spent last summer in Ireland playing golf, so hit all the major golf courses. And belly bunion, etc. And so you need to come this way, and I will do a little American for you to make sure the Irish are taken care of. So.
That's awesome.